All right, thank you everyone for coming to my town hall on election integrity and all the many facets of that issue, which is talked about a lot, and there's a lot of misinformation around it. So there are a lot of important things because election integrity is directly correlated to how representative democracy will be. So it's a crucial issue, but it's used by a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. So we want to kind of talk through it and get an idea of what's going on. And Sass is kind enough to join us, our expert for the day. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sass. I'm a board director for the Equal Vote Coalition. I also happen to be a board director for Democracy Without Elections. I also happen to be a consultant for the Respect Voters Coalition. Voting method reform, election integrity, good government reforms. That's my profession. That's my expertise.
Uh,
I definitely am here to answer questions and clarify things. There's a lot of intricate details that a lot of people are unaware of, and so happy to be here to help.
hey,
All right, and suppose I should say I'm August Warren, Democrat candidate running for Oregon State Representative of House District 2. And we've got some local Douglas County Democrats with us as well. I guess a bit of my background on this issue. I grew up in Tennessee and have been broadly aware of all the many facets of election integrity, especially in a lot of southern states with voter disenfranchisement, trying to get people off of voter rolls, things like that. And then, of course, I've got a big list of areas we can touch on. Campaign finance is obviously a big one. And then the discussion of ranked choice voting or star voting or some other method of voting other than just you cast one vote for one person and that's all you get. And then voter participation in general. That means voter disenfranchisement, but also young people voting or not, or just potentially how we can raise voter participation because the more people participate, the more representative we will have in our elections. I don't know if I already said gerrymandering is a big part of that and electioneering that way. And then the issue of mail-in ballots. There's a lot of people talking about that. And then specific to Oregon, we have the motor voter legislation, which allows a lot of people to get registered. But I guess I have a lot of kind of broad knowledge about voter issues in the country nationally, but not as much relative to like Oregon specifically. So I guess Sass, if I guess someone now, what's your perspective on voter rights in Oregon overall as compared to the rest of the country, maybe nationally or specific states?
Pretty good overall. It's the mode of voter registration is huge. And voter rights can include so many things. So that can talk about the citizen petition process, which was invented in Oregon over a century ago. We have the voter pamphlets, which are really great.
yeah,
Now, I probably would say that what they do in Colorado is maybe a little bit better, but most states don't have a voter's pamphlet. They just don't have one of any kind.
right.
And so Oregon is still ahead of the curve on that. Oregon does mail-in voting really well. Personally, I think that Oregon should also have physical polling locations. Now you can go to your county election office to like do a vote in person, like a voting booth thing, but that's one location per county, and we don't have public transit that gets everybody everywhere. So I would be in favor of adding that to mail-in voting and having a hybrid system to improve accessibility because if somebody has a motor impairment or is blind, there are machines can be very helpful for somebody to mark their ballot and do it in trust and in anonymous trust. But still, Oregon does a pretty good job with mail-in voting. I have concerns, and we'll probably get into this a little bit. That the legislature in this last session, pushed forward with this ranked choice voting bill and just straight up did not consult the county clerks and didn't listen to them at all. So that's just an
Mhm.
overall concerning thing to me because the state
Yeah,
absolutely needs to support the county clerks in their election process. It's a collective effort at every level. But and that's not even talking about women's suffrage and black suffrage and get out the vote and all of that. Again, overall in Oregon, I don't think it's going to be as bad as a lot of other states. So overall, pretty positive about Oregon compared to the other states across the country.
Yes. Since it is going to be on the ballot, if you want to give us a brief overview of maybe a comparison of ranked choice voting versus star,
Yeah.
and your perspective on that issue.
Yeah, so there are many different voting methods. So voting method is a combination of the way voters express support for candidates on their ballots and the way that support is tallied to find a winner. So currently, across most of the country, we use choose one voting. You can support up to one candidate. Candidate with the most votes wins. That causes lots of problems. You get this vote splitting problem where if you have similar candidates, voters who like all those candidates can't show they support all of them. The vote gets split among them, and then a worse option ends up winning.
Right.
And that starts a domino effect that causes all of these other problems, including increasing money in politics, increasing polarization, disparities in representation, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of gatekeeping, lots of great candidates who either don't run in the first place or drop out of the race early. And then you have, that's just one voting method. Ranked choice voting is another one. With ranked choice voting, and I'm going to give you an accurate description of how ranked choice voting works. It's often too oversimplified in this typical explanation. So with ranked choice voting, voters rank candidates in order of preference: first choice first, second choice second, third choice third, etc. You cannot rank multiple candidates equally, and then candidates left blank are ranked last. And to tally it, votes are tallied in rounds. In each round, your vote goes to the highest ranked remaining candidate on your ballot, if any. Otherwise, your vote is discarded. If a candidate has a majority of remaining votes in a round, they are elected. Otherwise, the remaining candidate with the fewest remaining votes is eliminated. So you've got this kind of double nested if statement thing going on. It's a little bit hard to track and follow, which is like its own concern. But fundamentally, the most important thing, and we'll also talk about election integrity and how it affects that. But in terms of comparison to choose one voting, you'll notice that in each round, you're still only able to support just one candidate at a time. And so in each round, you can still get the same vote splitting and spoiler effect that you get with choose one voting. In some cases, it's mitigated. In some cases, it's amplified, but it's still there. Star voting, completely different. With star voting, you're not ranking, you're scoring. So you score candidates from 0 up to 5 stars. So you give your favorites 5 stars, your last choice is 0, or you can leave them blank. You can score multiple candidates equally, and then you score others as desired. You show your preference order, level of support, right? And then to tally it is the 2 candidates with the most stars overall are finalists, and then your 1 full vote automatically goes to whichever finalist you gave more stars to. The finalist with the most votes wins. And so this eliminates the vote splitting problem because we're allowing you to express support for each candidate independently of each other candidate across a full range from nothing to full. We're counting all of the ballot data all at once. And so you don't have this, you can't, a candidate isn't going to be like threatening to spoil another candidate. At least mathematically, voter behavior is weird, but that's a separate topic that no voting method can avoid. And then that's the first step. And then the second step, there's only 2 candidates. It's the 2 finalists. And if there's only 2 candidates, there's no strategy, there's no vote splitting, there's no weirdness. So every voter gets exactly 1 full vote toward the finalist they prefer. So it eliminates the vote splitting problem. And it does it without requiring major changes to election logistics. All of the vendors in Oregon, we've confirmed with them that we would not need they would not need a hardware upgrade in order to do star voting, which is really exciting. And there's no major logistical changes, so it's still just addition, add up the stars, and add up the votes. So that's a very brief overview of those. And there are other voting methods as well, but I'll try to keep it tame.
Melissa, you had a question? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for going into that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not good at Zoom. Thank you so much for going into that. I had a lot of confusion about that. It's something that I really don't know much about. And is there currently, I'm guessing, a ballot measure regarding one of these? on the
Ranked
ballot?
voting,
Which measure is that?
I don't have is it one?
It's 117. Measure 117 is ranked choice voting for Oregon. It's on the ballot for this November statewide.
Now, ranked
It
choice is different from star voting,
correct.
and in your opinion,
Star
is
voting
ranked
is
is superior?
far superior. It's not even close, in my opinion.
Okay,
There are a
so
lot of good voting methods that are far superior, in my
but the
opinion.
problem with star vote or with ranked choice is that you could end up with two candidates that are maybe of the opposite political affiliation going against each other, or
That's, I mean, the problem with ranked choice is that you can end up with the same problems that we have in the current system. Is really
limiting
the
people.
yeah, you can have the spoiler effect. it
Uh-huh.
it does in terms of just the outcomes. If you only have two competitive candidates, then it actually is better because well, arguably, depending on your party affiliation, um
Yeah,
in terms of like the accuracy of the outcome, because if there's only two competitive candidates, then the spoiler effect is mitigated, but specifically the part of the spoiler effect that causes the wrong candidate to win.
Mm.
There's another aspect of the spoiler effect that allows minor parties to leverage power over major parties to move on certain issues.
Mhm.
And ranked choice voting does always take that away from the minor parties.
Oh,
Um, but so it's just, it's like you wouldn't need that if you had a good voting method in the first place. So it's like it mitigates that, but the other spoiler effect, yeah. So it's a little bit opinionated, but in that case, ranked choice voting works well. But it's when you get that third competitive candidate, that's when you start to have problems, especially a candidate who is politically in between the other two is generally going to be preferred overall by the electorate over the two on the more fringe. But
right.
ranked choice voting and choose one voting both will knock that middle candidate out early, and it'll end up going to one of the other more fringe candidates who's less representative of the overall electorate.
And just a quick follow-up. Has your organization taken an official stance on this measure? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, the board has decided that we endorse a no vote on Measure
Okay.
117, if for no other reason than that it puts some serious like concerning creates some serious concerning reductions in election security.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so like if nothing else, that is like a core concern of ours. Is important for us to, at the bare minimum, maintain the election integrity that we have. And
Yes.
the method itself, ranked choice voting, necessarily requires sacrificing some of the things we currently enjoy about our election integrity.
Wow.
What do you
Thank
mean by
you.
that? What things do we have to give up?
Yeah. So right now
Like,
in Oregon, each county tallies its own ballots. They get their own results, and then they publish it to the open world, and then anybody anywhere can take the results from all these different counties and add them up and find the winner of a given statewide or cross county race. Um, and so that you've got 1,000 people checking 1,000 other people, and that's a critically important check and balance. And that's all happening in real time, like literally on election night. So well before certification happens. With ranked choice voting, you can't do that. The amount of data, because of the peculiar way in which the ballots are tallied, um, you have to centralize all of it first before you can really do the full tally. And so what that means, we've seen this in Alaska and Maine, and from what I can tell, this is what's going to happen in Oregon too. Is they're going to put ballots, ranked choice voting ballots, like on trucks, maybe on planes, and they're going to truck them all to Salem, where they're all in one place, um, really a central point of failure, and then tally them all together all at once. And so that takes away a lot of local authority and local control. It makes it so that like if you can't get to Salem, you can't like watch your ballot be tallied. And it takes a lot longer. And so there's like concerns about the county clerks. I'm quoting them now, have concerns about getting the results in time for certification. Um, and it's, we've already seen failures happen from this, of like, by losing some of these important checks and balances, being able to have this kind of public check that happens, um, then like, in some cases the results are wrong and we don't find out till later. So for example, in Alameda County, they certified the election results, and then 20 days after that, a third party saw the results posted and where they were like, we think there's a problem here. Can you please send us your cast vote record, which is like all the data? And so that was not already available publicly. They had to specifically request that they had the connections. Then they checked and they were like, your results are wrong. And in one of the races, you actually elected the wrong candidate. And that wrong candidate ended up taking office, and they had to step down. And then a judge had to order a recertification of it. And it's like, critically, it's like that this mistake was not caught till after the certification process. And the reason is because it was lacking the checks and balances that allow us to typically catch mistakes before certification and get them corrected in time.
Wow.
That does make a lot of sense. My experience with this is mostly, I would say most people I've talked to are pretty similar, where heard of ranked choice voting here and there, and I think most people would agree that the nature of just cast one vote for one person it has a lot of problems and has contributed to many of the issues that we're dealing with today. And it also tends to keep things pretty static and resist change or dynamic parties or candidates. So I think a lot of people are just kind of thinking, well, something else would be nice. And then ranked choice voting is explained as, even if your top candidate doesn't win, your vote will still count for your second or your third. So it seems more appealing. And that's kind of what I had thought as well. But hearing it explained a little more clearly, that definitely makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of more failure points available there.
Can I just add, I don't know that it is inherent in the method itself that the votes be processed that way, or is it? I mean, is it inherent that the ballots must go to Salem? Is there not a way for the county clerks to process the ballots in that way? That's just a question that might be able to make this more secure, where people already have so many questions about election security. If we wanted something like this, or star voting, it seems like maybe there are ways that we could make it more secure, and it's just that maybe that's not included in this year's measure. So I don't know.
The measure gives the Secretary of State a lot of power to figure stuff out. But I will say, like, the question at hand is, does your grandmother trust the process?
Right.
So she can be confident that her vote is counted accurately, that as cast.
Yeah.
And so by that metric,
Yeah.
no, there's not a way to do it.
Okay.
You could, with the internet, you can do whatever. You could do everything digitally, but it's like, then you have to like stack like the middleman and the encryption. You got to have checksums, and it's like, your grandmother doesn't
No.
understand this. Your
No.
grandmother isn't going to trust this for good reason. There are cybersecurity people who wouldn't trust that.
Yeah.
And so you run into these. This is by that metric, the answer is no, you can't.
Okay.
If we were to restrict the number of candidates on the ballot, we were to say it's only going to be 4 or 5 candidates. There are some clever things that you could do that could make it work in a way that your grandma might actually trust. Which is surprising that they didn't do that in Alaska, in my opinion. But that's one of because they do restrict it. They have this open primary process. It's a final 4, so there's only 4 candidates, up to 4 candidates on the ballot. So there are some fancy tricks they could have employed, and they chose not to. And that was in 2022. So especially in there's such a vast low population density state, you'd think that they would want to do that. But yeah, I don't. I wish. I wish we did just always put election integrity and voter trust first and foremost, especially the moment that we're in. There's a lot of voters
Yeah.
who are losing trust in the election process, and we need to do what we can to increase that, and not just yell at them and tell them that it's secure.
Yeah.
There are legitimate improvements that we can make, and it's
Mhm.
okay for us to say things are working and the
Mhm.
results are accurate. But yeah, we can improve it, and if we have to invest additional tax dollars to earn that voter trust, I think that those tax dollars are worth it.
Absolutely.
So,
And yeah,
what I'm understanding is, they have, we can delegate folks to go watch the count, right, on election night at our local county clerk's office. But with ranked choice voting, there'd be really no point to do that.
Well, I wouldn't say there's
we-
no point.
Good.
There, there's still so there's the count and there's the tally. So the count is how many ballots do you have? So you're keeping track of your number of
Right.
ballots, and all your stacks and all your divisions and everything. And then the tally is actually like calculating the winner. And we do the tallies by machine across the state of Oregon, and then there's hand count or hand tally audits that are performed afterwards that are ordered by the Secretary of State. So by those hand, you can't do a meaningful sub tally of ranked choice voting. That's the real reason. Is with other methods, choose one voting, star voting, approval voting, so many others, you can have all of these sub tallies, and if you just have them all, you can just add them up and you get a winner. Ranked choice voting, because it has this multiple rounds of elimination, you can't do these meaningful sub tallies, and so you can't have like a precinct tally that means anything because you wouldn't know which candidate to eliminate until you know where it is everywhere. So you need all the ballots together. So definitely don't stop sending election observers to your county.
Yeah.
Keep doing that. But for a ranked choice voting election, they're just going to feed that all into one big machine and have it do the tally, which we're talking millions of votes. So that's a lot.
Sorry, I just have another quick question.
Please.
Do we have observers from both parties, independents, who observe the signature matching process in the vote tallying? Is that something that happens? Because I've heard that used against mail-in ballot voting.
I think the different counties in Oregon are going to be different on this. In Lane County, we got a new county clerk, Dina Dawson. She's fantastic.
Mhm.
And she implemented a really fantastic way of there's a room with a bunch of computers and you have election workers there on the screens going through and doing the signature matching, and then there are other big screens above each one showing what they're looking at, and it's
Okay.
a space that you can sign up as an election observer to be in there and you can watch what's happening. I've
Nice.
done that. It's really
Excellent.
cool. I love it. I don't know that that's the case in every county. From what
Right.
it sounded like, some of that stuff are new additions.
Mhm.
And that's the kind of thing that I would love to have the state legislature or do to a state level, is to increase the minimum standards and to provide the funding to the clerks in order to implement these kinds of things.
Right.
So I encourage you to send an email to your county clerk and get engaged with the process.
Okay, will do.
do you have a sense of, I don't know if you have any polling or have looked at anything of how likely this 117 is to pass?
I haven't seen any polling that I trust. My gut, and this is just my gut. You really shouldn't take it to mean anything. My gut is that it's a toss up. Ranked choice voting has seen a ton of backlash because it's been oversold and has not been delivering on its promises. It's been banned now in 11 states. And it's coming up for a vote on whether to ban it in Missouri, where I just moved to Missouri. I was been living in Oregon. I just moved to Missouri. And so like that's the thing we're fighting about. It's been repealed in about 24 jurisdictions almost, including just 10 cities in Utah during a pilot program. They could have kept it and they chose to get rid of it after they tried it. And it's been a struggle. And so in Oregon, it's got the legislature backing it, in part because a lot of funding has gone to a lot of the representatives who voted yes. It's a very
Mhm.
strong correlation. But yeah, overall, I don't know what's going to happen. What I want to do is make sure voters can make an informed vote. That's the thing that's important to me. As long as voters are making an informed vote, then what they want goes.
So
Absolutely.
so let's say that it doesn't pass, okay? So we don't have any form. What could someone like August do in the state legislature to ensure that we have a better form of alternative voting?
Fund the, fund the you could, there's a lot of options. So you could have a pilot project at a statewide level that provides funding and expertise and certification for localities to try different voting methods, so that way the localities don't have to bear the cost. Um, that could be something that's really powerful that the legislature can do. That I think would also be still very like comfortable to voters, of like, we're not forcing anything on you, we're giving you local control, we're just empowering you to try something if you want to, and you can go back at any time, you won't be stuck in it, we're not forcing this on you. I think that would be very meaningful and important to name check multiple voting methods and be explicitly inclusive is, I think, really, really important. So that would kind of be my angle personally. And there's lots of ways you could tweak that, or other ways to do it. But I think, yeah, supporting localities and trying things out is, I think, could be really important.
And you said that star voting was superior to ranked choice. Is that correct?
It, in my opinion, it is by a lot
Okay.
much better.
And you said there are lots of voting systems out there. Are there any that are better than star voting that you would recommend as state representative a push for or push to look into?
I mean, I wouldn't say. I mean, better works when we're talking about vote splitting versus no vote splitting. But once you get into the category of good voting methods, then it's just it's weighing your pros and cons, what your trade-offs, what you're balancing, and then taking that to voters, your locality, and being like, what are you interested in? Do you value expression more, or do you value simplicity more? So approval voting is the simplest possible voting method. You vote for all the candidates you approve of, the most approved candidate wins. Approval voting is used here in St. Louis, Missouri, where I am right now. I'm super excited to keep working on it. In Fargo, North Dakota, already been used in 5 public elections total between the two of them. And then there are better ranked methods. A ranked robin is a voting method that the Equal Vote Coalition endorses. So voters rank candidates. You can rank multiple candidates equally, and then the candidate preferred over the most others is elected. That's it. It's that simple. You can tally it locally. You can do the local sums. You have that extra expression on your ballot. You're going to have fewer voter errors and voided ballots due to voter error. You don't have exhausted ballots. The results are more transparent. It has much better honesty incentives, much more accurate results. And then there are other ones. There's score voting and 3-2-1. You start to get into questions about legal viability. Every state has different laws, and so if you're talking about local reform, then maybe only some of them are legally viable and others are not, and that just gets complicated. So I would just say check out the Equal.vote website. It's like I said, our approval voting, ranked robin, and star voting. But there are other really great voting methods that I like too that just aren't on that list. So those are maybe my core 3, because they give you something really good based on whichever ballot you want, something more traditional, a ranked ballot, or a score ballot.
So when you talk about local options, right? You've said to give pilot projects. You're talking about voting in local elections, like city council election, county commission, not statewide elections. Is that right?
Correct.
So those pilots would be.
Correct.
And if I remember correctly, Oregon, if you have a charter, a city or county can have their own preferential voting method right now, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
It's just about the support. So where do the dollars come from?
Yeah.
You got to get things certified. Yeah.
Well, is there any other of the list of issues that I was reading off at the start, or anything that you would just like to talk about or think is important?
To any of us?
Oh,
Or
I mean,
If you got a question, you're more than welcome to.
I'll wait. I'll hold it.
I mean, you know, nothing in particular. I will say the campaign finance reform thing is really interesting. I worked with Honest Elections Oregon on that project. It was an initiative petition, and once it was getting close, we were helping to collect signatures for that. The legislature freaked out and launched their own initiative petition that was really bad. It was like intentionally deceptive and subvertive, and it was like became this battle. And the Honest Elections Oregon and the state legislature got together and they negotiated something in the middle, and the legislature actually passed it. So it's not everything we dreamed and hoped for, but there are some improvements to our campaign finance that's going into place now. Thanks to that, the fight is not over, but yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things that we can do, like no longer being one of the only 5 states with limits on campaign contributions.
I guess for people who may not know as much about the issue of campaign finance or why it's important, could you give a little more background on like what the state of campaign finance is more broadly?
Yeah, so you have an important thing to know is the separation between federal and then state and local. So with federal elections, we got this thing in place right now, which is the Citizens United ruling from the US Supreme Court. And that is, yeah, it's pretty crap. It created this like corporate personhood thing, and then said that campaign contributions are free speech. Therefore, corporations can spend as much money as they want on elections, so long as it's in the form of a super PAC that doesn't work with the candidates directly. And it has just completely transformed campaign finance in a way that moves the incentives for candidates away from their constituents and their voters and towards, these other special interests.
Yep.
But that's so. In order to fix a federal campaign finance, that ruling needs to be overturned. But at the state and local level, the states have a lot more control. And so states can put limits in place. States can draw a lot more rules and boundaries. States can do things like democracy dollars, where you give every voter, for example, 4 $25 vouchers each election cycle that they can give to whatever candidate. That candidate can exchange it for campaign funds. And so that enables a lot more voters to get engaged with it. I saw some polling numbers on it. It's like voters who had like neither donated nor voted before, if they got these vouchers, they used them, and then their like participation, it was like a 400% increase in voter turnout for that segment of voters. It was like it was incredible how much more involved it get. And that's because the number one reason people don't vote is there aren't good options on the ballot. But if good options are able to get on the ballot because of this voucher program, they get the voters engaged, they show up to the polls. So that's just one thing, one example. But yeah, I mean, I personally would go a step further, and I would say like we should limit the amount of time that you're even allowed to be campaigning. These 2-year campaigns are insane.
Yes.
Nobody else does them. It's just
Yep.
a US thing, and we can put limits in place. We say you can't start campaigning till this time. You can't do these certain campaign
Yep.
activities till this time. That I think would also be huge.
Mhm.
And there's lots of public funding. There's so many things that you can do. We are pretty far off from the ideal right now in the US.
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah, that Supreme Court case, was it Ted Cruz who loaned himself like $1 more than the legal amount? I can't remember exactly what it was, but
Well, it
reading
was
up,
Mitt Romney who said that corporations are people too, man. So, yeah, I have feelings about that.
what about gerrymandering in Oregon? Is that something that we should be worried about? I mean, it's kind of a fact of life in America, but what's a perspective?
Yeah, there's a ton of gerrymandering in one-party states, and it's by the party that's in power. So I know you're running as a Democrat. The Democrats have done a lot of gerrymandering in Oregon, and there are a lot of conservative voters who feel their voices have been drowned out by it.
Mhm.
An important thing to understand about gerrymandering. So what gerrymandering is voters is like we have a lot of data on how voters in specific geographic areas have voted in previous elections as a group. And because of the vote splitting thing that pigeonholes voters into these two groups and they can't really move or between them or whatever, the votes in those geographical areas become very predictable. And so if you can predict how these geographic areas are going to vote, you can draw lines around them, these district boundaries, to accomplish two things. So gerrymandering is intentionally trying to do two things. Number one, get overall disproportional results, and number two, make your seats safe. So to avoid factionally competitive elections, so safe seats. An important thing to know is that if you have districts, you cannot completely end gerrymandering. It's because these two things, when they're both bad, you can have both of them be bad, but if you want both of them to be good, they're mutually exclusive with each other. And just kind of on the face of it, if you're guaranteeing overall proportional results, if you're guaranteeing the result of the election, well, then that election is not factionally competitive. It's not a competitive election. If the election is competitive, you don't know what the results are going to be. Now, that's not a lost cause. There's a lot we can do to try to balance these, to try to mitigate the problems using better voting methods that don't have vote splitting. You could have larger districts, multiple winners, use a proportional voting method. You could have independent redistricting commissions. You could add an active metric to measure against. So like, for example, watershed boundaries is one that's like non-political and it's stable and it forms communities. And so it's not a lost cause, but voters want three things. If they want these three things, if they want districts, and they want overall proportional results, and they want competitive elections, well, you're going to have to compromise on something somewhere. So this is an important thing to just understand fundamentally, that you can't end gerrymandering so long as you have districts. But there's a lot that we can do to try to mitigate or improve the situation, or just make considered decisions about what we want our trade-offs to be in the whole overall system that we put together.
I would just like to add, for a lot of us, it's very disheartening because we look at the Supreme Court, and I'm just looking at an article from the Brennan Center for Justice, and this was back earlier this year. The Supreme Court just made gerrymandering even easier. So it feels like bashing your head against the wall when we, the people, can do everything in our power to tackle gerrymandering, but we have a Supreme Court, I will call it, that will override the will of the people and make sure that gerrymandering, like if you want to look at a great case, an example of gerrymandering, look at Jim Jordan's district. I mean, look at the physical lines of that district. It's maddening. So this is where I turn to you young people, as a soon to be 53-year-old, and say, please help us fix this. It's not your fault. You didn't create this madness, but you are the people who are going to help us fix this, I hope. Our Supreme Court is so corrupt. I don't know what we do. I'm at a loss here.
I'm trying.
You are succeeding.
Very quick. I haven't yet. One quick note, and then I'll let you go, Betsy. The fact that the shapes of the districts are all like really skinny and terrible, that's not because it's gerrymandered. That's because the people drawing those maps are really bad at gerrymandering. You could absolutely gerrymander to get more extreme results with districts that like visually look a lot better. They're just bad at it. So to think, to like just take that in for a moment, like it's gerrymandering as bad as it is right now. It could be worse if our politicians were more competent.
Oh God, no, don't tell me that.
Well, my follow-up is kind of like on the younger people saving us. I won't be around because I'm a lot older than you are. But the one thing that in looking at, say, Douglas County, and if I remember correctly, maybe NAVs have actually even non-affiliated voters have outpaced now the Democrats, which used to have statewide the majority of registrants. In Douglas County, not surprising, there are more than twice as many Republicans as there are Democrats, but there's also almost twice as many NAVs as there are Democrats, a lot of which are probably somewhat related to the motor voter, right? And our overall registration has gone up. But how do, other than having candidates like August and younger people that they, I hear a lot about disenfranchisement, nihilism, right? I doesn't really matter. And
Yeah.
so how does the voting system affect that? And what are the best changes to be made at a state level, what it is true that for state elections, the state controls it, not feds, right? So, what do we do and how can we best try to address that? To try to, and the lowest voter turnout is people under 35, and particularly, the younger they get, the less likely they are to vote. I don't care where they are in Oregon,
Mhm.
the data doesn't really look good for the younger voters.
Yeah.
Um, that's always been the case. Younger people vote less than older at lower rates than older people. And I think that's everywhere around the world. I could be wrong, but I think that's true. Um, you know, I think that there are a lot of things that we're just kind of fundamentally doing wrong that we could be doing a lot better. Some part of it actually comes down to the systems. Like I said earlier, vote splitting leads to a lot of really great candidates either not running in the first place or dropping out of the race. Having great candidates on the ballot does a ton to bring out voters who otherwise would not have voted. Making voting easier is a really important thing. That's why I want to have in-person locations.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that are just there are actually I think there is a path to adding internet voting to what we currently do. I'm not I'm not convinced that it will work, but I think there's a path. It's usually a very polarized discussion. I think there's a middle ground that's worth exploring, but that's very detailed. I'm not going to dive into it right now.
Mhm.
There's other ways to get voters engaged. You could have, and this is something that little local parties can do, or candidates have a pizza party across the street from the polling place.
Mhm.
There's been a lot of success, and like people stop by for the pizza, and then you tell them, "Oh, you can go vote," and then they go vote. Like it works.
Yeah.
Um, well, we don't have polling places in Oregon, so
Right.
that's something that doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Um, you know, um, but I think also just like civic engagement at a young age is big. Lowering the voting age is something this is not an equal vote stance. I'm personally in favor of lowering the voting age to 16.
Mhm.
That way high schools start to become a ground for civic engagement and a place where candidates might go. Having another thing I would super be in favor of this is like you turn 18, you have to work the polls for one election cycle. It's like we make people go to school, make you work the like what like right like some kind of people talk about civil service, whether it's military or working the polls or whatever. Like that could be included in it, but like I think I think saying that it is valuable for us to if we say it's valuable for us to ensure that our youth are educated, reading, writing, arithmetic, and creativity, music, whatever. It is also valuable to get them involved in the civic process. A lot of people who lack trust in our elections right now have never done election observation. They've
Right.
never actually participated in the process. And if you get them to participate in the process, they start trusting it. So
Yeah.
I always encourage people to invest in it's like I can tell you all the whole process and why it works. That doesn't resonate with people in the way that seeing it and participating in it does. I think that's something that could really help is if we like get a lot more civic engagement at a young age through like an official, more mandated, required process. That's my personal opinion.
This is kind of random, but do you know of any county in Oregon that live streams its uh voter poll ballot tallies? Is there any way to look in, like you were an observer was it in Lane County in their signature verification process? Do you know if there's any kind of live
All of it, yeah.
streaming? Yeah.
Uh, Clerk Dawson did add that in Lane County recently,
Awesome.
which is fantastic. So you can see that.
Awesome.
I would guess that Multnomah County probably has it too, probably
Okay.
Gresham and everything. And so I assume some counties, but again, it's not uniform across the state. Again, this is
Right.
another way that the state legislature could help out is to say we want all counties to do this. We're going to provide the funds and the equipment and the expertise to make it happen.
Yeah.
Well, I guess what sort of change? What would the impacts be of? Um, I know it's different in different states, and in Oregon we have the requirement of party registration for primaries, and we talk about wanting the best candidate to be available, and so it seems to me that low turnouts in primaries lead to maybe not the candidate that a majority of people would. I don't know. How do you think that would impact if we were to get rid of that requirement, or is there just a better way to do primaries? Or yeah.
Yeah. So the primary problem is real. It is now the like extreme eight. Over 80% of our politicians are elected by less than 8% of the electorate, and that continues to get more extreme as time goes on. That's just because a lot of elections are decided in a specific party primary, and it's super low turnout, and it's just those voters, and it's just the voters who voted for the winning candidate. So yeah, that's very real. An important thing to understand is like how we got here, and it's actually like only 2 steps removed from the root problem, or 1 step removed. The root problem is vote splitting in the general election. So we have choose one voting in the general election. We have this vote splitting problem. You go back 200 years. The parties that look at this and they say, well, if we send 2 candidates from our party to the general election, they're going to split the vote and they're going to lose. So we're going to gatekeep, and we're only going to allow one candidate to go. And then the voters responded, and that party said, well, that's not democratic. We should get to decide. Let's have an election just for our party to decide who's going to go into the general election. Well, that does help to mitigate vote splitting in the general election, but it's not the correct solution. The correct solution is to eliminate vote splitting in the general election with a better voting method, with something like star voting. If you do that, now primaries, partisan primaries specifically, partisan primaries are no longer like necessary as a way to mitigate vote split in the general election, because you don't have it anymore. And so that opens up the conversation as to, do you have closed partisan primaries, open partisan primaries, nonpartisan primaries, like blanket primaries where like you still have partisan labels, or maybe you just don't have a primary at all. All of these options are now available, and there are pros and cons to each of these options. I just did a panel on this at our Equal Vote Symposium about 2 weeks ago. So you can check out the Equal Vote YouTube channel, Equal Vote Coalition YouTube channel. And there's not one that's like better than the other. It's just pros and cons, and without vote splitting the general election, now none of them have one up on the other anymore. And so it's just making this a serious consideration, going to your electorate, having those conversations with the voters, and then figuring out what it is that the voters want, and helping them to make informed decisions. So you make informed decisions together. You decide on the system you want to go forward with. So I think there's legitimacy to all. I really named 5 possibilities. I think there's good reasons to do any of those 5 if you've eliminated vote splitting in the general election first.
Can I just ask a quick question? As an old school Democrat and an older person, and I'm sure very naive or biased, to those of us who have grown up within a party and have always had party primaries, and I'm trying to be more open, and I know I have a ton to learn. Can you address the advantages of allowing open primaries? Because there's a part of me that says, well, why is someone who isn't a Democrat, why does that person get to decide who the Democratic candidate for Congress is? Do you understand where I'm coming from? And I know I'm old and that's wrong, but please help me. I want to be more progressive.
So you talk about open partisan primaries. The term open primaries, that's what it used to mean, but it got turned into this other thing about the blanket primaries that's confusing. So you're talking about open partisan primaries.
Right.
I think you make a good point. I would say, by opening up the partisan process, it allows you to have voters who maybe say, I don't identify as a Democrat, but I know that I generally tend to vote Democrat. And when it comes down to brass tacks, and the best candidates in the field across all of the parties are Democrats. And so I think I want to have a meaningful say in that. And so it allows you to bring those voters in and to expand that representation, especially because of like taking a look at this broader view of like from the perspective of a self-interested voter who is like strongly identifies with your party. You want close partisan primaries. From the perspective of what about democracy as a whole, and I want to make sure that we preserve our connections with everybody and that we have
Right.
elections that people trust and that we get
Right.
good representation for everybody, even if that means it's not the best representation for me.
Yeah.
That would be the argument in favor of
Right.
doing a different system. So I think they're both legitimate arguments.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I would say.
And I would just add, I lived in South Carolina for 8 years, and during the Obama years primarily. And in 2012, we had an open primary, an open partisan primary. And this was when Mitt Romney was running in at the time against Newt Gingrich. And a bunch of us Democrats, we didn't vote for Obama in the primary. We voted for Gingrich, and he won South Carolina. So that's an example of how open partisan primaries can be used to mess with the political process. That's why I'm a little leery of them. Just my background.
Right. But the
I
question is,
I want to give another question,
ahead.
example. I've only became a Democrat when Bernie Sanders ran in Oregon. Okay, to vote for Bernie Sanders, and the Democratic Party of Oregon, there was an effort to have an open primary during that. Bernie won the state of Oregon. Okay. But I was in the Pacific Green Party, and we had this discussion. And from a third party perspective, and even for me as a person who believes that elections should be fair, is that the state pays for the primary of the two major parties, but does not, their nomination process
Right.
does not pay for any third parties, because they
Yeah.
have to have, they can't have a primary by law because they're not a major political party. Now, when
Yeah.
the independent party, 4-6 years ago, actually had ballot status as major, they had a primary.
Yeah.
But if they're kicked out of that number, they have to have it by convention, which is
Mm.
totally funded by the party itself. The
Mm.
DPO, or the Republican, state party, does not pay a dime. We, the
Right.
taxpayers, pay for the whole thing. I
Right.
think that is fundamentally unfair and needs to be
Mhm.
changed in the voting system. And if we eliminated primaries, that would do it, because they'll be all kicked back into having to internally, and I'm a member of the Democratic Party
Yeah,
now.
sure, sure.
They would have to basically pay for their own nomination process. That only
Right.
seems fair to me.
I agree. I agree.
Absolutely a point of contention in Oregon. I've heard many times. With the Independent Party, and I'll quickly say, the Independent Party of Oregon, after they became a minor party, held a primary and they used star voting in it, in their internal primary, which is really cool. And then they did not have a primary in 2022. I don't think they did in 2024. If they did, they would have used star. But yeah, and you don't have to eliminate primaries in order to solve that problem. You can change your funding structure however you want to do it. But that is also an option, yes.
I was wondering about, I want to get into the funding structure a little bit, but first, are there any kind of outcomes that I'm asking you to speculate a bit here? So you can say no to this question, but are there any kind of interesting impacts that a change like star voting you think could have on party dynamics, or on, I don't know, any kind of unexpected potential outcomes?
Yeah. I mean, it depends at the level that you're using it at, like exactly how you're using it. It's very adaptable. There's lots of ways to do star voting. I mean, it's one voting method, but you could use it in primaries or not have a primary. Use it in general. You could use it for some races and not others, or all the races. But I mean, it would, by eliminating vote splitting, you would absolutely see real openings for third parties to start to break through and start to win some real seats and some real representation. To some degree, there are other forces in the way that help to keep the two-party system in power, but we would see that. I think the other, how else would it affect things? I mean, you would see, I think, more voters at the polls. And a broader array of them. Voters can be more expressive. They don't have to worry about the vote splitting anymore. You would see, yeah, and I think, but more importantly, I think overall is you would get representatives who are more representative of the electorate as a whole rather than being the one side or the other. That's really, I think, the fundamental thing. Is it's a mechanism, we call it center squeeze in the theory, in the science, for candidates who are politically in between other candidates get squeezed out through the vote splitting mechanic. If you eliminate that and you eliminate that center squeeze, then you're going to get those candidates who are politically in between other candidates are no longer going to be at a disadvantage. And so there's lots of great ones who might see themselves finally get elected.
Makes sense. So onto the campaign funding and financing. It does seem pretty clear to me that we have a somewhat silly system where you can just make an organization called Friends of August Warren, and then if I had $50, I could, channel it to myself, or I could
Yeah.
have, make a bunch of
Yeah.
ads. So it seems to me that the way to have the fairest election, the more money, the more likely you are to get elected, because buying media, buying advertising, name recognition is a huge part of the process. So that limits the ability of third parties, because the parties themselves essentially become big name recognition machines. And I know that there are some places that do publicly funded campaigns, but that's one of the things I'm running into with my campaign. Is I am a pretty average working person, not super wealthy. I don't have campaign resources personally to dip into, and as an organization, we're very grassroots, and every donation that we receive means a lot. So what is your perspective on public funded campaigns? Is that something that's viable, or does it have a positive or negative impact?
Generally pro publicly funding campaigns, and there are multiple ways to do it. I mentioned democracy vouchers earlier, but there are the other countries do things that are much more robust, where they literally just, if you get on a certain number of signatures, then boom, you're a candidate, and the state just gives you some certain dollar amount, and that's all you get, and you have that to spend. And then every candidate gets a 30-minute segment or a 1-hour segment on some public broadcasting station, all right before the election. The election cycles are much shorter, which enables a lot more people to actually run. So there's a variety of things about that, but some of them are matching programs. New York City has it's like a 5-to-1 matching program or something, or 8-to-1. It's like some massive thing. And so that allows you to go after those small dollar donors and get a lot of them, and that multiplies out to these massive amounts. And so yeah, there's a lot that can be done, but yeah, generally in favor of publicly funded campaigns, knowing that can take many different forms.
A quick question. Do we not have some form of publicly funded campaigns? I keep hearing Jill Stein's people talking about 5%, meeting the 5%. And I know when I've paid my taxes in many, many years, I was given an option to allocate a certain amount of my tax dollars toward campaigns, towards elections. Is that no longer true?
Yeah, so for presidential race at the national level, a party that gets at least 5% of the vote is eligible for specific types of funding from the federal government for certain things. I don't remember all the details of it,
No,
but
sure,
that's why.
sure.
That's why they really want that 5%. They go
Right.
after it every cycle, and they
Okay.
keep not getting close. But more power to them. And obviously Congress, it keeps threatening to raise the threshold. It's a whole thing. It's a real.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not fun. It's just politics.
They don't want competition.
No.
Um,
And they don't want the Green Party threatening them and making them move on their positions, which is half of the agenda of the Green Party.
So there is, as kind of just mentioned, this whole like bureaucracy that's developed around elections, and there's so much money moving around and changing hands. Like you mentioned, with the election cycle becoming basically 2 years on and then 2 years off and 2 years on again. There's so much media and news and advertising money, consultants, all this stuff. And in it's the way of America, the big business will resist their business being taken away. So it seems pretty fundamental that any measure that improves the fairness of voting and the representation of our democracy would go against the kind of entrenched powers that be, both in both parties and in media. And so what kind of resistance, again, this may be a bit more speculation, but what kind of, do you think they're going to advertise against it? Any sort of measures like star voting or like campaign finance reform? What can you foresee there?
Yeah, I mean, always. This is the part that's predictable. It was an interesting thing that the legislature pushed forward this RCV bill. It really, for the most part, came from Dan Rayfield, who's the Speaker of the House, and he helped get RCV for the first time in Oregon in Benton County. So it's kind of been his like agenda, and now he's running for Attorney General. And he's going to win. And so that's gonna. It's like, it's like been his whole thing. But so that's kind of a bit of an anomaly. Most of the time, this kind of stuff happens through the citizen petition process. And the thing with voting method reform is if like you can get it on the ballot, get voters to pass it, if you can get it implemented, you get just 1 or 2 elections with it. Now you've replaced most of the politicians. And so now they're replacing politicians who won under this system. And then it has the staying power. So like it's a fight, but there is like a hurdle, and once you get over it, you're like generally pretty safe, so long as it's a good proposal and it actually delivers on its promises. That's an important caveat. So that's the good thing about us having these regular cycles and not having to wait for politicians to call an election like they do in a lot of parliamentary systems. But because it's this regular, predictable thing, that like if you can manage to get it into place and just hold on to it for a little bit, then oftentimes it will have staying power. It's a real fight to get it there. The citizen petition process is a very powerful way to get it there. About half of states have that statewide, and most localities have it in some form. We don't have it at the federal level, which sucks, but states decide who goes to Congress anyway, so the states can change things about that. So it's a real battle. It's politics, this, August. It's not easy, but it's doable. We've done it before.
Right.
We've changed this country before through the efforts of real people wanting real change and putting in the work. And so it's not a perfect track record, but it's good enough to go off of. And so that's what we're going to do.
That's right. And August, I have a quick question for you. And first, I know with federal congressional races, I mean, they're every 2 years. So for them, campaigning never stops. I read a report that said that the average member of Congress spends 30% of their time fundraising. First of all, I'm ashamed and embarrassed to ask this, but what is a House term for an Oregon House member? How long is that term?
2 years.
It is just 2 years. That's what my fear. Okay. I hope and pray that in 2 years you will be here and be our candidate, because I think that you have a lot of momentum and that this is a grassroots movement that will only get bigger and stronger and grow. And I just want to take this time to say thank you so much for running. I am grateful to have you as someone that I get to vote for. And in 2 years, I look forward to voting for you again. So thank you. That's just an aside.
Appreciate it. And yeah, like I said, something being hard is no reason not to do it. A lot of the most worthwhile things are pretty
Are
difficult to do.
hard,
I kind of, unless you have
if it was easy to be done by now.
exactly.
If it was
right?
easy, it would have already
Right?
been done. Yeah.
Exactly.
And,
I do, if you're gonna close, can I ask you a question?
well, I've kind of got one final question,
Oh,
but yeah,
okay. Sure. No, no, I can wait.
okay.
I'll be quiet.
We've, we've kind of had this whole conversation under the presumption or shared understanding, I guess, that our elections are for the vast majority, I don't know how to phrase it, are in almost entirely fair and representative fundamentally on the national level, and that claims that have been thrown around are mostly distraction and misdirection and made up. And I imagine you're probably tired of reassuring people that there is not the kind of problem that's being talked about. But what would you say to someone who is worried about, mass ballot harvesting or, dead people voting or all the kind of claims that get thrown around?
Mhm.
I mean, the first thing is to listen. I hear you. I hear that this is a concern, that you're concerned about this, and I want you to trust the elections. And and as a representative, I want to, I want to make changes. I want to improve things in a way that will earn back your trust. Um, you know, our elections have been, you know, in terms of addressing your direct claims about previous elections, first and foremost, I would encourage you to get involved in the election process. I think if you see what happens, if there are problems, I want you to catch them. I want you to be there. I want you to see them. I want you to understand them and explain them. And maybe, I think that if by getting involved, you'll see that it is more trustworthy than you realize. But you're not going to take my word for it. So that would be my number one ask is to verify what you've heard by getting involved. But I will say one thing, which is follow the money.
Mhm.
Both big parties care a lot about making sure that every vote for their candidate is counted. And so they are both in the weeds. They're dug in, putting money and effort and people in there to make sure that all their votes are counted and that votes from the other party that they're not getting more votes than they're supposed to. They care a lot. There's a ton of money behind this. And so if you follow the money, I think you can just kind of logically conclude that the efforts really are there and they balance out in a way that leads to trustworthy elections. And
Right.
one more point is that we've been doing this for a long time, and lots of things have been tried and lots of things have gone wrong in the past, and we've established ways to correct it. And there's a ton of details, and to really get a feel for what those are, again, I'll go back to I encourage you to get involved.
Right. Right.
Yep.
Excellent.
Another kind of follow up that came into my head, and again, I may be asking you to speculate here, but do you have any concerns about the upcoming election? Because I know that I have heard things about the Supreme Court kind of paving the way for there to be a kind of gap in time or a gap in certainty, or you know, there's a lot that could go on based on what happened last election. So, do you have any
Yeah.
perspective on nationally
I
speaking?
recently started a social media detox, so I'm not up to date on the latest news.
For you.
Yeah, well, and then I replaced it with video games. It's not really working. I'm just uninformed now. But I will say, like, things are pretty spelled out in terms of the dates when things are going to happen. We've the reason that it's not the second Tuesday, but it's the first Tuesday after, or it's the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, has to do with the number of days it is before this thing, and that's a certain number of days before this thing, and that's a certain number of days before this thing, and so it goes to like January 6th, January 20th, and like there's January 3rd, January 6th, January 20th, and these are like dates that are set in stone. Some of them are in the Constitution now, and so I don't foresee serious I would guess that the Supreme Court's not going to be able to get in the way in terms of the days. It's spelled out pretty clearly. The legislature is going to do what it needs to do. The executive branch is going to do what it needs to do. And I will, to the people who are concerned about the response of others ruining the election and causing problems, thinking about January 6th and have a negative opinion of January 6th, I really want to point you to level head, like cooler heads prevailed. Nancy Pelosi, Kevin McCarthy, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, and Mike Pence.
Yeah.
All of them, both sides of the aisle,
Yeah.
they were on the same page. They got it done. They got everybody back in the chambers. They made the vote happen. Cooler heads prevailed. So that's, and it will still be while Joe Biden is president. I don't foresee Joe Biden doing stuff. I'm gonna try to say as nonpartisan as I can. He's not a very active fellow. And so I think that it will play out, is my opinion. I don't know, I can't predict, it is speculation, I can't see the future.
Sure.
But I think ultimately cooler heads will prevail. And we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe Trump just has a clear win, and Kamala and Biden pass over the keys, and it's a peaceful transfer of power. It's a possibility. So we don't know right now. So it's still roughly a toss up between the two at the moment, and voting's already started. So yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. That's all I can say.
I guess what I had heard, I'll come to you just a second, but I'm not looking at a source right now, so I wouldn't quote me on this, but I had heard that I don't know if it's a Supreme Court case, but some states are making it possible to challenge ballots. That is what could potentially bog down the process. So I don't know the validity of that, but I'll do some research after this.
Well, and Betsy and I lived through 2000 when it came down to the Supreme Court, when it came down to hanging chads and Florida, and the Supreme Court finally saying, stop counting the votes. I have PTSD from that election. I'm sorry. Obviously, we won the popular vote. Apparently, we lost the Electoral College, but it was because the Supreme Court stopped the counting of ballots. So I have zero faith in the Supreme Court. I have zero faith in the numerous red state legislatures that will offer up alternative electors if their states don't go Trump's way. So I think there's a lot of legitimate fear around this election. I think people on both sides are afraid for very different reasons. I think on our side, we have very legitimate reasons to be afraid. So we are trying to be as proactive as possible. I know that there are numerous groups that have hundreds, if not thousands, of lawyers on the ground in precincts and in county clerks' offices trying to fight these things. It's hard to fight the state legislature. It is harder still to fight the Supreme Court. So I am very scared. That's my personal take.
A critical question, I think, is: are any of those things happening, or like, are there legislatures doing those attacks in swing states?
Yes.
Saying that, okay.
Yes.
I will reiterate.
Look at Georgia,
again,
hand counting how many millions of ballots, hand counting 4 or 5 million ballots. That is an attack on democracy. In my mind,
I would,
as it is,
I would take a more reserved,
as it is ineffective, less efficient. Sorry, I'll be quiet.
Yes, but again, I care about voter trust. That's important.
Yes.
And I would do both and check the numbers against each other is what I would recommend. If voters need a hand tally in order to feel comfortable with the results and they want to spend the money, I say do it.
That's the only option they
check
have.
it with a machine.
They don't have that. They don't have the machine option in Georgia.
So, the other thing I was going to say, again, I can't predict the future. We may see a problem. There very well could be problems. Gore stepped down. That's an important thing to remember about the 2000 election.
It's true. Yeah.
Would Trump step down? I'm not going to make a prediction. I'll leave that as an exercise to the audience member. But you know, I'm not saying there won't be problems, but it just I personally, this is not an equal stance. I personally think that ultimately cooler heads will prevail. I think that's my opinion. That's my speculation, personal. I could be wrong. I hope I'm not.
Yeah,
I
it
That's
seems
where I'm at.
appreciate that. I appreciate that. Thank you. You're smarter than I am, so I'm gonna go with your gut.
I hope I'm right.
it seems to me that they're gonna try and do it in subtle ways and just make it as hard as they can to count the votes if it looks like they're not going their way. But I would be very surprised. And again, I'm not an expert either, but I'd be very surprised if states sent electors that didn't correspond to the the results.
They
Actually,
passed
that I would.
legislation to make that
I
possible. They've passed
yeah.
legislation to make that possible. That's what scares me. Several red
I
states
want to
have
side.
specifically passed legislation to send a different set of electors to Congress. That's what's so scary.
I'm going to side with Melissa on this one. The U.S. Supreme Court has affirmed over and over and over again that the states are allowed to do whatever they want with their electors, and they do not need to have public elections or listen to the popular vote in their state at all. They can do literally whatever they want. So if the legislature passes a law that says we're just deciding who these electors are going to be and how they're going to vote, they're allowed to do that.
Yes, they are.
I don't like it personally, but that is constitutional. And so again, I'm like, yeah, so red states did that are gonna go Trump anyway. So it's like practically I'm less concerned. But like ultimately I have to take the stance of like if we want to solve that problem, we have to solve this much bigger problem, the electoral college, which is a whole other conversation.
Right. Right.
Don't want to keep you for too long. So if there's any kind of final thoughts that you have or last messages you want to leave people with, more than welcome to fire away.
I
Yeah,
just want to say, Sass, thank
Can I-
you for being here.
I need to rescind something I said earlier. Earlier, I think I had said something along the lines of the board of directors endorsed a no vote. That's not true because we are a C3. We don't do yes no on legislation. I mean, we're allowed to do up to 20%, but our stance is we want to inform voters of the issues with Measure 117.
Sure.
That we have serious concerns, particularly around election security, election integrity, and we just want voters to know that, to take that information. And I was going to say into the voting booth. Oregon doesn't have voting booths,
Right.
but to their ballot when they should be receiving in the mail. Did y'all already receive your ballots in the mail? It should be right around nowish that you're receiving them.
Wednesday.
There,
I got
That
that.
Wednesday, the ballots will be starting to be mailed out. So they start Wednesday, the
Gotcha.
day after voter registration deadline.
Okay, cool. But that's that would be all I've got. Yeah, but I encourage. Oh, I'll say I'll do. Can I promote a little thing?
Absolutely. Right.
So every Tuesday evening, I host an open democracy discussion where anybody anywhere, it's virtual, can come and ask questions about voting science, democratic mechanics, or voting method reform and receive live personalized answers from folks who are active in the space. I post it all over the place. Probably the easiest place to find it if you go to starvoting.org/events or just go to the Get Involved tab and go to events. You'll find it there. So anybody who sees this and just has questions, wants to learn more, or just listen to a conversation about it, you are free and welcome to join that. So that's just a resource for anybody and everybody.
great.
Thank you. Yeah. Lots of
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to thank you for coming. That was so much excellent information. It's been a great guest and super informative. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, and thank you for the good questions and as well, and Betsy. These town halls have been really awesome. It's great to just talk about things. I understand things better, get some different perspectives, and get to talk to really knowledgeable people. So I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, as
Yeah.
always. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. This is fantastic. Always love getting to talk freely and openly about this stuff and really get that information out there because some of these topics are hard to navigate, or there's little things that people don't know or they think they understand, but they don't actually. And I have a lot of experience and familiarity with all of those things. So it's great to be able to smooth things over on a lot of those topics.
Excellent. Well, we can probably end the recording and we will upload this on YouTube so people can watch it later. And we will be back next Sunday. So thank you all again for coming, and we will see you next week.
Till next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.